Today's issue of Broadband Action is brought to you by Keller and Heckman. They are a CBAN Broadband Backer and the sponsor of today's podcast. Keller and Heckman's telecommunication practice has been around and in the industry for over 60 years, serving as a dynamic leader in supporting telecommunications and broadband across America. They've really done a great job in supporting public-private partnerships. In fact, one of the law firms in the nation that has done the most when it comes to public-private partnerships. They've also been very active and involved in community broadband initiatives. And we'll be talking a little bit later in the podcast with Jim Baller, who has been won numerous awards lately for his work as an advocate for community broadband initiatives. They're also active in settling pole attachment agreements, small cell access, really anything that comes to regulatory and legal work in being a broadband provider. They are the go-to Washington law firm to do that. The entire team at Keller and Heckman are great people. They've been extremely supportive of everything that we've done at CBAN, and we want to thank them for continuing to show that strong support. And by doing that support, by being a CBAN Broadband Backer, and again, Keller and Heckman, the sponsor of today's edition of Broadband Action. Welcome to another edition of Broadband Action, the CBAN podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Dean, and today we're going to be giving you a little preview of a great event that's coming up on the West Coast that CBAN is excited to participate in. It's called Broadband Communities Summit West, and joining me today to talk about BBC West, as it's called in short, is Brad Randall. He is the editor of BBC Mag, and he's going to be giving us a little preview of the event. First of all, Brad, I want to thank you guys so much for partnering with CBAN. You guys are allowing us to, you're helping us promote our events, and we're helping you promote your events, which we really appreciate that. And a little bit later, I'll be showing a promo code that our CBAN folks can take advantage of, so they can go to BBC West and save a little money so they can enjoy some of the nightlife in San Diego. But first, Brad, just again, thanks for coming on. First of all, for people who don't know who Broadband Communities is, maybe outline who is BBC and what do you guys do?
Sure. Well, thanks for the introduction, Curtis. And I'll say it's an honor to partnership with CBAN. We believe in the work that y'all do.
Thank you.
As for what BBC is, we are a company called Terrapin. We have a portfolio of events, and recently, about a little over a year ago, we acquired Broadband Communities. I've been on board since then, and that is held every year in Houston. It draws people from all over the country to talk about connectivity and learn strategy into how to do the best they can in the industry and create a healthy ecosystem for all of us. We noticed that we had a shortage of attendees from the West Coast in Houston. So we kind of scratched our heads together and said, well, let's go to them. And there was born the idea for Broadband Communities Summit West. And it's happening October 30th, 31st. So it is Broadband Communities Summit West month. And I think, your audience, they may be aware because you probably have some people on the West Coast listening, but for those in the center part of the country and the eastern part of the country, the market on the West Coast is different. It's different geographically. The challenges are different. The approaches are different. So I can't think of a place in the country that is more deserving of its own show than the Western states, especially when you consider the fact that most of the shows in our industry seem to be either in Middle America or the eastern part of the country.
That's a great observation, and it's something that I would absolutely concur with. I have been to numerous Broadband Communities events over the years. I've spoken at them, been on panels, etc. And I've also been to a couple of events out on the West Coast. The NTCA puts on events all over the country, and I've been to one of their leadership conferences out there. And you're exactly right. The approaches are different. The environment, the atmosphere is a little different on the West Coast. And I've also attended a lot of events at Mountain Connect, for example, that's held in Colorado every year. It's always it's amazing the different flavor you get in these different regions because there are different approaches. There's different business models for broadband providers. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And that's one of the things I'm most excited about going out to San Diego is to experience that slightly different flavor in my interactions with people while I'm there.
Well, I mean, just think about the coverage of area that exists in the Western states. I've said before, I live in Massachusetts, and if you drive 3 hours north, you're in Maine. If you drive 3 hours west, you're in Albany. 3 hours south, you're in New York City. In most places in California, you drive 3 hours in any direction, you're still in California.
You might
Uh,
still be in the same county, for
yeah,
goodness sake.
well, yeah, in San Diego County, you might be still in the same county, and San Diego County is an interesting one where, has San Diego, one of the largest cities in the country, but it's a massive expanse that goes all the way almost out to Nevada, Arizona. It
Right,
has some of the most
right.
rural swaths in the country. So, you think about the county broadband office there in San Diego and the diversity of issues that they face. I'll give you an example of kind of how the Western states differentiate themselves. It comes through with the example of the Navajo Nation, where they, are kind of in the middle of the most rural part of the country, the American Southwest, and they're seeking to get broadband, faced with a challenge. That challenge is that the ground is solid bedrock.
Mm.
Deploying fiber is not practical, and it would be incredibly cost prohibitive. So they scratched their heads together, got with Tirana to employ a fixed wireless access solution, which seems to be working nicely for them. And that's kind of an example of some of the tidbits of information you get out of these conferences. They can really be invaluable if you're dealing with a community that has the same challenges as somewhere else and you don't know it. It's a place where the industry comes together in a really positive way.
Yeah, it's just fascinating how policies have to vary. Geography is such a huge factor in that, and it's also been a challenge in that, for example, bead. We won't get deep into the bead weeds, so to speak, but uh, how bead has a strong fiber preference, but there are areas, just like you mentioned, where that's just not really achievable. And there may not be existing pole structures, right, to even ride along for fiber. And if going underground is not an option and going overhead is not an option, you almost have to seriously, you have to look at things like fixed wireless as solutions. And one of the really great things, I was able to talk with some of the folks in the fixed wireless business this past week, is the innovations that they're doing right now. I
Mhm.
mean, they're always a step or two behind what fiber can do, but they're really making great strides forward in the ability to do increased capacity, increased bandwidth, lower latency, that sort of thing through a wireless connection. So, and they have to, right? They have to keep innovating because we can't do all this with fiber buried 2, 3, 4, 5 feet underground, because there's just places where the ground won't allow that. So
Yeah, and another example I'll give you, it's just kind of a microcosm of what we're seeing in the Western states. There are a lot of unconnected communities, and I don't have data in front of me to say that it's more than in the Eastern states, but like the community of Coalinga in southwestern Fresno County, I believe they have over 4,500 addresses that are just getting first-time access, and that's unwired broadband. That's a private equity project. That is pretty large. I mean, it's a small town, but it's pretty large for a community to be getting first time access. And so the God's work is happening out there, and we are going to it. And just so you can figure out if our event is for you. It's all encompassing: network operators, property
yeah,
developers, builders, property owners, educational professionals, system installers, consultants, equipment manufacturers, people from government, people from legal, tribal organizations, local, state, federal. Everyone is welcome, and we want everyone there because
yeah.
that is what we do at Broadband Community Summit in Houston.
Well, some of you, if you are actually watching this podcast on YouTube, I've got the up here on the screen right now the URL to the registration site. And again, I'll do the same here in a little bit with a little extra special savings that you might get through CBAN. Also, put these in links here if you were listening on podcast or your favorite podcast platform. So you'll still be able to take advantage of this. So. Brad, the overall agenda, maybe what hits some of the highlights of what will be discussed and who some of your keynoters are.
Well, yeah, I'm lucky enough to be the chair of the show. So the first face you'll see is mine on day one and day two. But then the way we started off is very strategic. We start with those keynote addresses, keynote panels. We'll have updates from service providers. And then day two, we'll have, I believe it's day two, we'll have updates from the state of California. So you get your public, private, both sides of the coin there. And then we have networking opportunities immediately after those keynote presentations so that you can have one-on-ones and meet with the speakers that may say something insightful that you want to learn more about. And then all the while after these keynote addresses, we'll have track sessions going on throughout the day. And we have multiple themes. And we also have exhibitors presenting in our exhibition hall, which has a wealth of providers, solutions creators, and all types of stuff from the industry that you may not even know you need. I've walked around and it's eye-opening to see who shows up. Some of these things are on the cutting edge of where the industry is going. So it's a good opportunity to get that, especially on the West Coast where you may not get it too often.
Yeah, it's almost like the West Coast sometimes gets overlooked a little bit when it comes to these big conference. And you're exactly right. The content's always amazing at BBC events. I can attest to that from the many times I've been, but it's the networking that really seals the deal for you, right? If you can have a quality network experience, you learn so much on the trade show floor. You learn so much at lunch or in the hallways between sessions or on the way to happy hour or whatever. That's where the real learning comes. That's where the real peer-to-peer learning happens. And, that's why I think that I guess I'm kind of a conference junkie in that way, that I love to go and I just like to talk to people and learn where they're coming from. It helps us at CBAN, right? Because our mission is to help communities and broadband providers to solve problems that they have on a daily basis. And so places like the BBC Summit West, the main conference you have in Houston, are always just a giant sponge experience for me.
Well, and if I can toot our own horn a little bit more here, it comes out when you look at our list of speakers. People like Joseph Valander, the chairman of Tribal Ready, he'll be one of them there. Thomas Tyler, the deputy director of Connect LA. Chief McKinley, Kim McKinley, the chief marketing officer of Utopia Fiber. It's an open access network out in Utah.
A CBAN member, by the way.
There you go. And so, these are some heavy hitters in the industry. I mean, like Kim, I always love to see what Kim is going to have to say. Some of these names will be the first time hearing them. Oh, geez, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
We can go into that again.
No, let's just keep going. People don't understand that phones ring. Don't worry about it. I don't like to edit. I like to just go. So,
well, let's do it then. And you know what? I want to get into our track sessions too.
Yeah,
because we're kind of bringing the gospel out there to the Western states by having track sessions focused on BEAD strategies, on the digitalization of rural life. So over the past few months, a little bit about what I do as the editor for bbcmag.com. We meet once a year in Houston, and my job is to try to keep our audience informed throughout the year when we're not meeting. And now we'll meet once a year in San Diego. So over the past few months, in anticipation of BBC West, I have been tooling our coverage very California centric. And we as a company have taken a full dive into some of the issues surrounding connectivity in California. Some things that are connected that you may not realize are connected. California has been struggling with an affordable housing crisis for several years. And so they're taking steps to address that in the state with accessory dwelling units. Basically, you can convert a shed into a residential unit, and your town will have within 30 days to either approve or deny that permit. And that starts the turn of the year in 2025.
Well, that is coming up real soon, isn't it?
It is. That's and all of those, all of those accessory dwelling units, ADUs, will have to be connected.
Right.
And so that's a piece of the puzzle. Another one is digital discrimination of access is a hot topic right now in California, where you have providers pitted against advocates, providers are worried that they may be held liable for business decisions that cause unintended consequences. So they're trying to argue that they'll take less risk.
Right.
Advocates saying, well, that's always the argument. And then there's still people to be connected, so they'll be here anyways. And so California is not going to look the way it looks right now in
Sure.
2-3 years. Another thing that they're dealing with is state budget deficits. So middle mile broadband has been the recipient of cuts in California.
Yeah.
And we've heard about that from some of the communities that would be impacted by some of those cuts. And so there's questions, there's uncertainties in the industry. And, when we go to cuts, it's always easy to cut something that people don't have yet. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
broadband falls in that well. But what we're also finding is, places that you wouldn't expect to need that assistance, like inner city LA, they do. And those will be the types of places impacted. I think of Watts, for example. And so every issue that you can imagine that revolves around broadband in the United States exists in California and more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a microcosm of the whole country in a way, and people have certain preconceived notions about the coastal elites and whatnot. But California is such a big country; it really is a microcosm of the entire nation. You've got extremely rural areas, you've got very urban areas, you've got, areas that are dependent on manufacturing, you've got areas that are dependent on high tech, and it's the biggest agricultural state in the country. So there's a little bit of Iowa in there. There's a little bit of New York in there. It's all kind of mixed into one giant long state.
Well, if you've ever flown over the Central Valley, I mean, that's where Coalinga is, where I mentioned earlier. It's just endless farms. And, people think of California and they think San Diego, LA, San Francisco. It's a lot more than that. But also at our conference, we'll have people from Nevada, Idaho,
the
Utah,
whole kind
Colorado,
of mountain region and west there. Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, I'm looking forward to it for myself personally because it's been a few years since I've been to San Diego, but my goddaughter lives out there and she's getting married next year and she's stationed there. She's in the Navy. So I'm looking forward to meeting up with her at some point while I'm out in San Diego for BBC Summit West. So
that's exciting. This will be my first time to San Diego. I've been to the other California major cities, but not San Diego.
Yeah. It's at a pretty amazing place, and the climate is probably some of the best weather in the world.
So I've heard.
and knock on wood, they haven't been affected by some of the terrible issues that we've had in other parts of the country with our variable weather. Well, Brad, I'm gonna bring up our little promo code here. We have it on the screen now, but again, if you're listening, I'll put this in the link in the description on your podcast platform. We were able to work out with Terrapin a 20% discount on BBC Summit West registration. So you would enter the CBAN 20 promo code when you check out and register, and that's going to knock 20% off your registration fee. I also set up a short URL there to get you right to the registration page for your convenience. So again, this will all be in the description if you're listening. And if you're viewing, you just jot that down while we're talking here and away you go. And make sure when you come out, if you do use the discount, or even if you don't, please find me somewhere and say, hi, I heard you talk about this and that's why I wanted to come. It's always nice to know that we're not just shouting into emptiness here. So Brad, I really appreciate all you do. Looking forward to meeting you and seeing you and your team out in San Diego here in a very, very short period of time. Sneaking up on us here, less than a month to go. And thanks for coming on our podcast today.
Likewise, Curtis. I'm excited to meet you as well, and everyone who attends the summit. Thanks for showing an interest in what we do.
Absolutely. That's Brad Randall. He is with the BBC Magazine, and he is one of the organizers of BBC Summit West. Well, today's edition of Broadband Action is brought to you by KH Law, or Keller and Heckman law firm out of Washington. They have been one of the primary, if not the primary, supporters of municipal and community-based broadband networks for ever and ever. And I'm really excited to have our guest today, Jim Baller, who is going to be talking about K&H Law's involvement at the BBC West. And Jim, most of you probably know Jim, right? Jim is a legend in the industry. One of the first people I met in my broadband journey. He is an Institute for Local Self-Reliance Lifetime Achievement Award winner, and he's also won the Star Award from the Fiber Broadband Association. So, Jim, accolades that you well deserve, I must say. I wish I had an award to give you, but I don't really have anything in my award bucket for you. But we do want to show our appreciation to KH Law. You are one of our broadband backers of CBAN, and your support is helping us do the things we do, and we greatly appreciate it. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Curtis, working with you and members of CBAN is itself its own reward.
Well, I appreciate that.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, hey, let's turn our attention just a smidge to the BBC West Summit. You guys play a role there, a pretty key role in that October 30th track on the strategy stage. And so kind of outline and frame up what you and your team are going to be doing that day, because you've got some really good content to present at BBC West that everybody needs to know about.
Well, we're going to be involved in 3 separate sessions. I'm going to be kicking off with the keynote for the strategy session. Strategy can have 2 meanings. One is how a country approaches broadband. Another is how participants in a site-specific project strategizes how to make the project work.
Right.
So I'm going to start out with the broader framework, going through some of the highlights and milestones that we've experienced over the last 30 years since the early 90s. And then I'm going to introduce the separate sessions in the strategy track. Sean Stokes later is going to do a session in which he's moderating presentations by people involved in the Alton Works project in Alton, Illinois, and the Culver City project in Culver City, California. Both of these projects are very interesting in their own ways, and we hope you'll see the unique aspects that they bring to the table. And then Sean and I are going to do a legal session in which we touch on several of the key legal and regulatory issues that can contribute significantly to the success of a project.
And there are just a few legal and regulatory issues, are there not, sir?
In fact, in the strategy session, there are going to be 2 sessions on legal issues, the one that we're involved in and another one involving another group of participants. There are clearly lots of legal issues.
Yeah.
We hope to simplify them and help people understand what's at stake and how to work within the legal and regulatory environment that we face.
What's interesting, not to dig too much into the weeds on the legal and regulatory, the regulatory is probably more common. We share the same regulatory barriers in many cases across the nation, but that the legal issues are very much a state by state issue. And as you know, and I'm sure you're very excited to see that the momentum has been toward reducing municipal broadband restrictions over the years. And even this year with Minnesota's finally getting lifted, we're seeing that momentum to where there are fewer legal barriers out there for cities to take control of their own technology.
Well, you're right, Curtis. That's been very gratifying in the sense of removing barriers to entry. We have a different set of challenges when it comes to programs like BEAD and some of the other programs where the challenge is to ensure that units of local government have fair access to funding that's available and that their applications for it are judged on a level playing field with that of other providers.
Right. And that, of course, is going to be, I'm sure there'll be a lot of BEAD discussion at BBC West this fall, although there are only a limited number of states where there's actually active BEAD funding round applications, and many other states are waiting for maps and whatnot. But we're right in the heart of the BEAD rush, and we'll be hearing more about that and at BBC West. So, Jim, it'll be a pleasure to see you there. Hopefully we get to break bread together and not just pass each other in the hallways as happens at these events. Spend a little quality time with you. We really want to thank you and KH Law for being such strong supporters of CBAN and for sponsoring our podcast today. And to everybody else, I just want to remind you that we've made an arrangement with BBC West that you can get a 20% off discount if you register. Use this link that you see on the screen, and I'll put it in the description below if you're listening to the podcast. And you'll save 20% off at BBC West registration. Still time to register, and we'd love to see you. And if you do make it, find us, say hi. We'd love to meet you and learn your story about your journey in broadband. Jim, again, thank you very much for joining us today.
And thank you, Curtis, and keep up the great work.
You bet. I'll do what I can. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time and joining us today on Broadband Action.